The principal change in medicine is striking for physicians, and that is that we are no longer the chiefs of it all, that we no longer have hegemony over the delivery of healthcare in the United States.
Welcome to the Business of Healthcare podcast from the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management. The center is based at the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. The show, like the center, brings together business leaders and other forward thinkers to discuss how best to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing, increasingly complex healthcare industry. I'm your host, Dr. Bob Kaiser, Director of the Master's Program in Healthcare Leadership and Management for Professionals. We are still recording the Business of Healthcare podcast remotely, but optimistically look forward to returning to our on-campus studio at the University of Texas, Dallas. I use the word optimistically in describing the mindset associated with our future view of the healthcare industry. We did not expect the magnitude and range of disruption. However, pre-COVID-19, we are all aware that the practice of medicine and healthcare administration was ripe for change. Our mission at the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management is to provide the insights, knowledge, and skills to prepare both clinicians and administrators to meet the challenges of our increasingly complex healthcare industry. On this edition of the podcast, I want to probe deeper into the motivation of learning and reveal the various areas of professional development. Today, our guest is Dr. Chris Hutson, physician leader and clinical anesthesiologist. Chris recently earned his Healthcare Management Executive MBA in the Alliance for Physician Leadership program, which is an educational partnership between the University of Texas, Dallas Jindal School of Management, and the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Bob.
Chris, you're a proven physician leader with decades of clinical and progressive leadership experience. Let me get to the big question. Why in the world did you decide to pursue an advanced degree in healthcare leadership and management after years of medical school and continuing medical education?
I think that's a great question because I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't get asked that question from a variety of people. Most often, it's actually other physicians asking me why I would bother to go to school to learn about the business of medicine, like what's important about it. And I kind of look at it from two perspectives. One of them is a personal perspective. For me personally, I had to, in my specialty, I personally understand that I have a shelf life and I can't continue doing the clinical work that I do now at the same level as I get older. Physically, that's just not a tenable option, pulling all night call and doing those types of things. And so for me personally, I was looking as, well, what's next? I also understood that I was going to naturally progress as a leader within my own specialty and my organization, whether it was the anesthesia group that I was with or within the hospital. And so I made a commitment to learning more about the business of medicine. I felt like I needed to have that experience to be an effective leader going forward, and that any opportunities that would present themselves to me would require education in that domain. So I felt like an MBA was just absolutely necessary. Since that time, you kind of go in with preconceived notions when you start on these adventures, I guess. And then while going through the program, and as I've kind of sat back and have time to think about things, I really look at it from a much broader perspective than ever.
Okay.
The reality is that medicine is different now. And I think that difference has been accelerated, certainly within this coronavirus pandemic, and we've had to do things differently. The principal change in medicine is striking for physicians, and that is that we are no longer the chiefs of it all, that we no longer have hegemony over the delivery of healthcare in the United States.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of different players. There's advanced practice nurses, there's physician's assistants, there's even pharmacists are engaged in direct healthcare. Certainly administrators have a much better sense of clinical medicine and how it's to be provided. There's vendors, there's payers, there's insurance companies. They all have input into what goes on clinically at the patient level. And so for physicians, that's a kind of a change in role. That role now has changed from being the absolute or titular leader of the healthcare team to a participant that at any given time may not be necessarily the head of that care episode, if we were going to term it that way. Sometimes I'm not in charge at all of the care delivery, that I'm a participant and I'm a resource within it. And so the role now of physicians, I think, is really transitioned to the one of being an influencer.
Yeah.
And an influencer has a much different skill set than the titular leader, where the titular leader is hierarchical and it follows a certain prototypical development plan and credentialing and all that stuff. As an influencer, on the one hand, competence is a given. It's expected that I'm competent in the field that I work in. But the real skills are really the skills that are much more difficult to teach and develop. And those are emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and this ability to work within a matrix system or cross-silo leadership structure where you might be the head one minute and you may be the follower the next minute. And you have to be flexible to move within that. But the qualities that make you successful within there are a lot different than just being the physician of a care team. And so that's something that certainly the program at the University of Texas, Dallas has taught me, is to be able to function within that environment. And I think that's a big change for physicians, especially older physicians like myself, who've kind of were raised in this very strict hierarchical environment.
So, Chris, what you're speaking of here, these life skills, in a room with 50 other physicians, most of them, I would say, have a IQ which is at least one standard deviation above normal. They're all very, very smart people. They've all been trained and skilled. Most of them have been the best of the best in their upbringing and their education. And these life skills that you talk about, like you mentioned, emotional intelligence and things like negotiation and conflict management, areas that you may or may not feel strongly endowed. Is that something that was a major factor in your learning process?
To tell you the truth, I think it was probably the most important. Of all the things that I learned, accounting and financial management and economics, business economics, operations management. But to be a leader, there's this notion that leaders are born, that people are natural leaders. And I actually disagree with that. Certainly in my time as an officer in the United States Army, the military works really, really hard at leadership development. And I think similarly for physicians, or I think any leader anywhere, those skills first need to be taught and understood and then practiced deliberately. I make a joke. In one of our classes on conflict management, the guest speaker gave us cards that detail how to resolve a conflict. And I will be honest with you, I still pull them out. When I know I'm going into a conflict situation, I actually brief myself on the steps of conflict management. And I actually utilize those skills and I refresh my memory because thank God I don't have to do conflict management every day or every, and so, but that just highlights the fact that leadership in many ways is it's almost like a muscle. You have to train it, you have to teach it, and you have to train it, and then you have to exercise it. And I think there's this false notion that, by just putting in the time and that, you put your 30 years in, that you're endowed with some sort of special wisdom to be a good leader. And that's just not the case. You have to work at it. It's a lot of work. And certainly the program taught me those skills for sure.
A number of the physician leaders in the cohort group, they said that they dealt with conflict on a daily basis, and it wasn't at work. It's working with, the spouse and the children and the neighbors and all those other areas in life that it really helped to bring value to. So let's talk for a minute about the learning environment. Through your education, years and years of medical training and education, The learning environment, getting a medical degree is pretty intense. This learning environment for your MBA, how did that work for you? A lot of people think when they hear about an MBA, they're going to sit there in a lecture hall and they're going to take notes and take tests. What's the working environment for you in this, getting this special skills and knowledge that you talk about?
It's actually hard work. And certainly, at least in the program at UT Dallas that I went through, there's a lot of preparatory work. So during the resident phase in specific, where you're with your cohort and you're working with your fellow classmates directly in the classroom, you don't get a lot of time to work. So you have to really come in ready to go. And so I spent a lot of time taking all the preparatory materials and really digging deep and trying to figure out what it meant for me and how I was going to approach it, and then setting up some goals of what I was going to get out of my 4 days of work with instructors directly. And so I actually think it was, in some ways, it was harder than medical school because, you're given a body of knowledge and you really have to work through it because it's not as concrete as learning a list of, signs and symptoms of congestive heart failure. When you're talking about leadership and leadership issues, first of all, you have to kind of be honest with yourself, like who you are, and how you think and what motivates you and how you communicate, and taking stock of yourself first. Sometimes a little painful. That type of work was actually probably the bigger highlight, because now I find myself engaging in that same type of discourse in my head of, am I approaching this situation appropriately? What's motivating me here? And then in turn, I kind of assess those things in the person that I'm dealing with and what's their motivation? Why are they behaving this way? And it actually makes it much more rewarding experience. And certainly the great part about the class is there's all stripes. There's all types of physicians. There's also all types of experience in terms of not only chronological, but work environments and all that stuff. And so you get to see a multitude of different perspectives and how people solve similar problems in different ways throughout that. And I thought that was probably one of the most rewarding things.
Well, I think having a safe learning environment where you're free to experiment and try things out and learn from what you do and what others do. I know quite often it's just not the guiding professors or guest speakers, but it's actually your peer groups, the other physician leaders, and you can see and learn from them and develop relationships with them.
This episode is brought to you by the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, the definitive resource for healthcare management education in North Texas. The center is based in the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. It plays a unique role in training the next generation of healthcare leaders to meet local, regional, and national demands. The Jindal School uses its strengths in accounting, administration, finance, marketing, and information systems to educate highly qualified personnel for healthcare administration and executive leadership positions. The center is home to 7 healthcare leadership and management programs, including undergraduate and graduate programs, as well as executive programs for physicians and working professionals. For more information, visit us online at jindal.utdallas.edu/healthcare.
I'd like for you to talk a little bit about maybe some of the relationships that you did garnish in your learning process and some of the value that you got from that.
Well, that I will say this, there isn't a week that goes by that, or even a day that goes by that I don't actually talk to someone from my cohort, believe it or not. That's one of the beauties of this, is that I think because we have a shared interest, all of us have elected to pursue the master's for whatever personal reasons, but we are a self-selected group. We're all motivated. So we all have a kind of a common idea of the importance of it all. And so that makes just the natural talk, talking with each other. I will say that for me personally, I have a very strong relationship with my instructors, who I treat as mentors and refer back to all the time when I have problems. On a personal level, the direction that I thought I would end up with my MBA is not at all where I ended up. I thought I was going to be trying to find a healthcare administrative job or as a chief medical officer. And I ended up starting a biotech company with my seatmate, Tom Cumbo. And so now I'm, a founder and CEO of a startup, and that's not where I anticipated that I would end up. But there's been other opportunities that have opened up with other members of the class in a similar fashion where I'm asked for advice or how to approach certain things. So that's a daily, I think. I have conversations with my cohort classmates all the time.
So looking forward here, we kind of think in terms sometimes of transformational leadership style. What does that really mean to you? I know that that's a key concept that we've tried to express in our leadership development to these programs.
Transformational leadership kind of is a broad term. And the way I look at it is that it first starts with an acknowledgement that the traditional business of medicine is rapidly changing. And it's changing in terms of not only who provides healthcare. I mean, my particular specialty is a great example of that. We're the oldest specialty to have advanced practice nurses working with us. And for others, that's very new. And so, working within that environment is a big change. So there's transformational leadership kind of at the interpersonal level, where you're helping people kind of get past a major change in the way the business of medicine is conducted. And I mean that both in terms of an economic sense and a clinical sense. There's also transformational leadership in terms of multitudes of technology that are involved in what we do on any given day, and sorting through what really works and what doesn't work and how you advance your organization forward using those tools. And that's kind of a different type of transformational leadership, where you're kind of this visionary, looking at and projecting into the future how your organization or how your medical team is going to function. You have to cast a big net. There's a lot of different skill sets. There's even technologies that are even outside of medicine that are actually being brought in. And so to have that type of vision is a lot different. So to help people transition, being a transformational leader is one that can, in part, shepherd people through these changes successfully, both in terms of emotion and intellectual capability. And I think that's important. And that's where I see my experience, certainly at UT Dallas, to be so important. It opened my eyes to all these different things. And I think that's the first step, is really kind of taking stock that there's a lot out there to tap into and that you have to take into account. That's kind of where I started this journey, I think.
So, Chris, you have a young son who someday will be looking at a career. What kind of advice would you give him if he thought that he wanted to be a doctor? What's the future of medicine look like? How would it be different from when you started years ago?
Well, that's a great question. I think, first of all, you're talking to a guy that's, I think, working on his third career. I don't know if I'm necessarily the right guy to ask career advice about, other than the fact that I think you can't be so rigid in your concept of what a career is. I look at my military career and I look at my clinical career as an anesthesiologist, and now my entrepreneurial career. And I even have a hard time with that term because I'm not so sure I'm at the entrepreneur level yet. And we're just starting. We'll see. That's usually reserved for people that are successful. And I see that there's common threads throughout all that. I think one of the best career advice is, I think you got to figure out what you really like doing, like what gets you going. And for me, the common thread is I've always loved building things, and so in creating stuff. And so in the military, I was offered a lot of opportunity to do special things. And certainly in medicine, my career, I built clinical programs and started departments and have done those types of systems building enterprises. And then now with BioSherpa, our company in specific, that's building a whole, the things that I've had to learn just in developing that has been really rewarding, scary and rewarding. But I think the career advice I would get is kind of figure out broadly what really what really interests you, like what really gets you going, not in terms of the specifics of I like being a doctor, but just think more globally. I think, a lot of people try to cone down too quickly. And I think that's a mistake, I think.
Yeah, when you stop and think about all the innovation and all the changes, all the technology innovation in particular, how things have changed and will continue to change. So I think the key element there is to be a lifelong learner, be motivated to advance confidently, to explore new things, learn how to play well in the sandbox, make sure that you have a broad view of other people and develop those interpersonal skills. And I think that path will continue to change. And like you said early on in this conversation, is that no longer is the doctor the person who's that craft specialist, but now more of a team player and a team leader. And it's exciting for me to see the progression that you've made. And it's really rewarding for all of us at UT Dallas when we see our graduates continue to advance and do innovative things. Being an entrepreneur is a bold ambition, and there's no such thing as failing as an entrepreneur. That's what entrepreneurs do. They fail, and they fail, and they fail, and they succeed. And you're certainly on that path of innovation and discovery, and we look forward to hearing more about what you're doing there. Any closing comments, Chris, for our audience about this educational journey you've been on?
Well, my sincerest hope is that all physicians out there get better educated in the business of medicine. I think it's very important. And I think being able to speak to your administrative colleagues on a coherent level and even use their language and speak to them in the way they speak, I think pays a lot of dividends. I mean, in the end, we're all on the same team. And part of being in the same team, and I've learned this in my experience as an infantry officer going to different countries, I think I was successful in all those deployments because I actually learned the language of the country I was going to. I mean, I wasn't fluent, but I learned just enough that I could make a connection with the people there. And that actually made my life a lot easier. And it also let me take care of my soldiers better. And it made the mission more successful. And I think that's similar in medicine. I think we as physicians should take the first step and learn the language of our administrators, understand what they have to do, what challenges they have. And I think that would actually make for a much more engaging experience for all the parties. And I think in the end would solve a lot of the problems that we see in medicine today.
Point well made, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us. I do have a closing comment, something unusual I typically don't do, but whenever you take on a program like a podcast for the general public, feedback is a wonderful and motivating gift. And I want to share a nice note from one of our student listeners, Pedro Ize from the East Coast. He's out of the Boston area. And here's what Pedro had to say about the podcast. I'll quote him. I've been a listener of the Business of Healthcare podcast that you moderate. Listening to every episode has helped to shape my knowledge on healthcare, especially on improving quality and access while also reducing cost. It was one of the reasons I took a leap of faith and started my master's in healthcare management program at UMass Dartmouth. I graduated in December 2019. I am grateful for your knowledge. Keep sharing. My regards and best wishes. So very nice feedback. Thank you, Pedro. You keep advancing as well. And we want to welcome feedback from all of our listeners. Please share the podcast with those. Not everybody is a doctor, not everybody's an administrator, but in general, people are interested in the business of healthcare because it affects all of our daily lives. So thank you again, Chris, for being with us today.
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Business of Healthcare podcast. Join us online at businessofhealthcarepodcast.com to find episode links, notes, and more. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Healthcare podcast on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting app. To learn more about the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, go to jindal.utdallas.edu and then search under the Center and Institutes tab on the navigation menu. Also, we want to hear from you. If you'd like to provide feedback, make suggestions for future guests or show topics, or just want to get in touch with us, email us at healthcarebizpodcast@utdallas.edu. Biz is spelled B-I-Z. And let us know how we're doing. I'm your host, Dr. Bob Kaiser, with the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, where we're leading change by changing how we lead.